Malaysia is at the center of ASEAN. Every other ASEAN country too will benefit from an integrated ASEAN economy, and a single production base is one of the objectives of the ASEAN Economic Community. And with free trade, there will be suppliers, across the value chain to the finished product, which will be based in some ASEAN country chosen by the investor, so as to take advantage of the larger ASEAN economy, which is $2.4 trillion US, and of an upwardly mobile consumer market. About 50% of the ASEAN population. ASEAN population is already the third largest in the world, over 600 million, after China and India. So it's big. But then 50% of the working population are under 30, And just imagine, it is the only growth area in the world, apart from India, which has that kind of young population. So ASEAN will be reaping the demographic dividend, even as other centers age, even China, aging population. And this is a dynamic, productive, upwardly mobile, middle-class population, which is not only going to contribute to production, they're also going to contribute to consumption. And the consumer boom that will take place will make ASEAN one of the largest consumer boom centers in the world. And it is not surprising that not just bigger ASEAN companies, but multinationals, I've used the expression, are circling around the ASEAN wagon. They see the opportunities. There are lots of cracks, there are lots of cracks in terms of full enjoyment of many of the ASEAN action plans in terms of achieving. But if you wait for the perfect 10, you might lose the first mover advantages. And many countries, many companies are looking at these opportunities. And you see surveys being done that show that 80% of foreign multinationals in this region have an ASEAN strategy, 80%. And then you see surveys showing that in countries such as Indonesia, Myanmar, the increase in sales workforce of foreign multinationals has been high and sharp. And the projection in the company's plans, revenue projection particularly, is also high. And so obviously this story is not just an abstract number story. It is a potential that people want to tap. And of course, you can say that future potential is not current reality, right? But if future potential indicates how the reality will change, and if the reality changes at a rate of 10%, 20%, or 30%, or maybe 80%, with greater fulfillment of the action plans for integration, you will grow with it. In a world where growth is not fantastic, and so people are looking for this opportunity, and so ASEAN has everything going for it, and it must make sure that it optimizes, the potential. The problem I see with countries which have such great potential is they think they can be more relaxed about it because their potential is going to be there anyway. Now, the private sector, and me, myself as chairman of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council Malaysia, and I'm going to be the chairman of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council for the whole region from the 1st of January 2015. We want to push the boundaries. I have done work with CIMB, ASEAN Research Institute, with a body called the ASEAN Business Club. We've done a gap analysis. Really is a gap analysis in vertical studies of various sectors in the ASEAN economy, measure pronounced governmental policies against reported experience of companies, of businesses. So it is a gap analysis, and we have launched what we call the Lift the Barriers reports, and we're pushing it. And these reports report on this gap analysis and then propose what are the measures that could be taken to reduce the gap, to fill the gap. Now, a gap analysis is much more easily done than filling in the gaps. So I spent quite a bit of time to try and fill in the gaps by engaging with officials, ministers, with leaders. And my position in ASEAN Business Advisory Council helps. But then we have a council of 33 members each from each ASEAN country, and they have various interests as well, inevitably. But certain thrusts, certain broad thrusts can be identified and determined. And reports such as the Lift the Barriers reports done by outside people are important. At the same time, reports that we do ourselves internally at the ASEAN Business Advisory Council are equally important, based on surveys. So there are almost like two opposing forces coming at each other, but people think it will be necessarily in opposition. But it's actually not. There are two opposing movements or forces or interests which are complementary ultimately, although they may be coming from different directions. First, you have the big companies. They see the problem, they see the potential, and they want to take advantage of it, and they're impatient even in wanting removal of barriers and so on, because they know what the potential means. But then you have small and medium enterprises, okay? And in terms of employment of workforce, the range of employment in ASEAN countries in small and medium enterprises is it ranges from between about 50% to a high of 97% in Indonesia. Employment is critical and very important. And these companies may not be prepared, to face competition, change, and they may not even know enough about the ASEAN economic community and about FTAs. In fact, we did a survey in 2013, last year. Only 39% of SMEs were aware of the ASEAN economic community and its promise and its FTAs and so on and so forth. And then even bigger companies, only 70% of them are using the FTAs, for their exports, for their trade, for their activities. So there is also, apart from the gap between pronouncement of policy and actual experience, there's also a gap in knowledge. Knowledge, because SMEs, and in terms of employment, they're very important, but in terms of production output, they are about a third on average of ASEAN economies. In terms of exports, they're about a third. But in terms of employment and total number of enterprises, they're huge. There are 60 million SMEs in ASEAN. And their particular needs have also got to be addressed. Most of them have been transactional in their business dealings, sometimes even interpersonal, and they do not use technology. They have not been so used to rules, regulations, where new things are happening and so on, what they have to do to exceed. They're not even particularly, many of them, used to exports. They're quite happy in their little niche, in the little market at home. They have their customer base and so on, but this customer base could be disturbed. Therefore, at the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, we have a working group on SMEs and see what their particular needs are, so that they will not be swamped, inundated, by liberalization. It happens all over the world. But if we do not, they're not better prepared, there could be a reversal of liberalization. It also has happened elsewhere in the world, automobile industry being a classic example, US, Europe, trying to roll back against Japanese automobiles coming in. So that's one aspect. Reversal can be damaging to this ASEAN promise. The other aspect, of course, if employment is lost, there will be socio-political implications, which also have to be thought about ahead of time to make sure it does not occur. At the same time, it must be understood, restructuring of economies must take place with greater liberalization, globalization. It's not just the ASEAN economic community. There are FTAs with other countries. They're all coming in to the ASEAN market as ASEAN gets more prosperous. And they're going to penetrate and they're going to displace some companies, SMEs. So we must do something to ensure that we have strong SMEs that can withstand and indeed benefit from this integration. So there is this working group, but the governments of ASEAN are fully aware. I mean, they are politicians. They're fully aware of this need, and I think there is an actually governmental level working group at the ASEAN Secretariat on SMEs. And next year, they will have also a strategic action plan will be announced at the governmental level on preparing SMEs and educating them and making sure they benefit from the ASEAN economic integration. So there's a mammoth load of things, that's happening. Great potential, some challenges, and efforts to try and meet those challenges.